This video is about how you use Active Directory. We're going to go over a ton of different types of configuration and use cases on Active Directory, all the types of things you can do, creating accounts, managing the accounts and the attributes, and so on and so forth. This video is generally for the person that wants to understand Active Directory, what it is, what it's doing, and that sort of thing. So without further ado, let's just get right into the video and teach you guys on how this works. So here we have a Windows Server operating system. In my previous video, I showed you how to create a domain controller. So if you wanted to hands-on follow along, you would have to follow my previous video. Otherwise, just stick with me here and we're going to go over how Active Directory functions. So if you head over into your tools and you go to Active Directory users and computers. Now this is a bare bones brand new server, so there's not much on here other than kind of the defaults and a computer that I joined to the domain and a user account I created down here. We are going to create a new OU, or organizational unit. The term OU is used a lot in IT, so get used to organizational unit being an OU. And what an OU is essentially just a folder. Okay, it's a folder with all of the objects stored into that folder. So this is the computer's OU, this is the user's OU, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to create some additional organization here. Why it's called organizational unit. So I'm going to have Ryan's office under my office, and inside of here, we are going to create computers. And we are going to create users. Button. Now the reason I'm doing this is because in a normal organization, this is generally how a lot of places will do things. They'll have like an office OU, and then they'll have each office, say there's 50 offices at this company. They're going to have a list of 50 organizational units. And each one will have a nice breakdown of computers and users or laptops, desktops, whatever they decide to kind of break things out in, because when you start to apply different policies to each organizational unit, it just creates a really nice network of organization. With that being said, you can technically have any type of object in any of these. So in here, in the user section, we can add computers, groups, devices, anything you want. But when you start to apply policies, it's going to apply to everything in a specific OU, and that is a terrible way to manage things. Now that domain controller, when added, goes into this domain controller OU. This is a default. Generally speaking, you do not want to change or move this because all domain controllers will automatically get listed here when you promote them. All right, but now going back into the computers, we are actually going to want to move this. Now, another good practice, when you move, don't drag and drop. It's not a good way to do things, even though it does work perfectly fine. You want to right click and move just so you don't accidentally move it into the wrong organizational unit and have to go find it and move it out. So a good practice is to right click always and then move from there. So we're going to go into offices, Ryan's office, drop it in computers. Now for users, we're just going to create a new one so we can go over how to create a user in Active Directory. So right click, new, go to user. Now here we have this lovely window, first name. I'll just type all my real information here. And let's go over this. So first name, last name, it'll automatically fill the full name, and then we'll use the login name. Now this login name is when you log into a computer that is joined to your domain, it will use these credentials to log in. It'll use Ryan Kelly. As you can see here, this is the actual logon name. It'll just be Ryan Kelly. This will technically be the email. Both of these work. You'll have a username and you'll technically have a email as well. So let's go to next, the password, do whatever you want. Now let's go over these couple options. This is usually a good thing to keep checked for other types of users, because what happens is you set their password for them. Then the next time they log in, or rather the first time they log in with their user account, they are going to need to change their password. So it's going to prompt immediately to change their password, and then they will go through that setup. Now, these next three options are pretty self-explanatory, right? So generally speaking, first option, great for new users. Second option, not ideal because that means you're the only one that can manage their password. They can't change the password themselves. That will be very niche to the type of environment. The password never expires is definitely not a good thing. If anything, this will usually be used for different types of service accounts, but then you will want a way to manage your service account passwords and have them rotated in one way or another. So starting off, this might be a good thing to use for service accounts, but if you're going to be involved in security, there'll be other ways to handle passwords expiring and whatnot. So again, we're going to leave that. And then the account disable is pretty self-explanatory. If you don't want anyone to be able to sign into that account, you hit that little checkbox. And we're going to go through those settings kind of again after the user's created. So right click, we have our options to disable the account, which was basically that checkbox that we just saw. Of course, reset password, but we are going to go into the properties instead. And the reason for that is because we have a lot more options. So we'll go through this in a second, but let's go over to this account tab. Now you have all these account options, and as you saw a couple of them when we first created the user account, and you also saw a couple of them when we right-clicked. You had the disable option, but here you could do essentially everything that you need to do. So like I said, you have the login name that is tied to your domain, which kind of gives you that email format. And then you also have just the username. You can sign in to a computer using either of these if it's on the domain. If you have a lockout policy, which will be group policy, I can create another video on a whole thing for group policy. And we're going to go a little bit into that in this video so you understand how it actually functions. But as of right now, if you have a policy that locks out an account, for example, if they try to log in 5 times, password's wrong 5 times, it'll lock their account. And you'll see that this checkbox is to unlock accounts, and it'll write something down here. I forget exactly what it'll say, but it'll be pretty obvious. You'll be like, account is locked out. So you'll have to hit this checkbox, unlock the account, and just hit apply so they can try to attempt to log in again. And then down here, you can see all of these different options. The most used, the very first one, if you change somebody's password, you can recheck this here check mark. And the next time they log in with their new password, it'll do that same idea of, okay, now you have to change your password. This will be good for when you reset a user's password. This will be good for when you change a user's password. Of course, you're going to know it, but when they log in for the first time, they have their, little secure password that you do not know. So that's kind of the intention behind this. You're not supposed to know any user passwords. And then these few things, the user cannot change password and password never expires, we have already gone over. But again, they're right here in this section. And then there's a couple other things down here. Okay, now we are going over to the general tab. This is where the magic happens. Ideally, your email. So we are going to enter in my email. If you do not have this email field, okay, your email through whatever type of service that you're using, whether it's on-prem Exchange, if it's a hybrid environment, Gmail, whatever it is, you need this field to be able to sync your actual email to your user account. Otherwise, the email will not be tied to that user account. Okay, so make sure this is filled out along with everything else. And you will also want to take a look at things like Office, the phone number, and if you go over to the organization tab, you'll want job titles, department, company, and the manager. Now, the reason you want to generally fill all of this information out if you're at a company is because you can run different types of scripts and commands and policies all based on all of these different fields. For example, if you have a specific manager, you can apply, hey, if you have this manager, you get this policy, okay? So that's why we want to make sure as much information is filled out for every user, and that will give you the most granular management of everything. But again, this is technically just a bunch of metadata to actually have the user working. We just needed to create it and then fill out the email. That's the most important part. Now, another thing is if we go over to the profile tab, One of my favorite things is the login script, okay? So what happens is when a user logs in for the first time, it can kick off a script that you create. And what this can do is things like mapping all of your network drives, applying some kind of weird, I don't know, application installs or configurations or anything like that can be done every single time they log in. So ideally, the best thing to do with this is something like mapping certain types of drives. Okay, you can create a script that maps all these types of drives, and every single time they log in, it'll make sure and remaps them every time. And this could be a really good use case for a number of situations. So I love using this type of script. And that is more or less the basics. There's one other thing I'd love to show you guys. We want to go over up into this tab here and check off advanced features. When we have this checked off and we go back over to our user and we go into the properties again, we're going to have a number of additional tabs here. Mainly, we are looking for the attribute editor. Now, this is a lot more detailed, okay? This is where everything happens. So all of this metadata that you're filling out in these tabs, like the general tab, your address, profile, all that actually ends up in this attribute editor. And while I'm not going to go through this gigantic list of attributes, just know that it's here. So if you're ever trying to find something incredibly specific, it's going to be probably in here. Or if you're even troubleshooting, you can do like a comparison of two different users, check out their attribute editors and see if you can find anything that's kind of looking a little funky or missing and things like that. And it's a really good troubleshooting tool. Now, the very last thing that we are going to look at is the member of tab. This is probably the other most used component of Active Directory. We need to create groups, assign the groups or assign the users to those groups to be able to apply different types of policies to them. And this also includes permissions to things like folders. So let's create a new unit. Let's call it security groups. And we're just going to create a new group. We're going to call this our test group. You'll want to leave it on global and security. What a distribution group is something that kind of handles emails. A distribution group means that all of these users get sent an email if they're part of one single group. So I guess a better way to explain it, security group is for permissions, policies, things like that. Distribution group is kind of how exactly it sounds. It is going to distribute whatever you send to anyone within the group, but it is not used to apply permissions and policies and things like that. So here we're going to create a security group. And in the security group, all we're going to do is add some members. For example, we're going to add myself. I have two users. I created this one. This is my administrator account, and then the one we just created. So we're going to hit OK, apply. OK, great. Now we can start understanding how to actually utilize something like a group. Now there's two things I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how to apply this to a folder. I'm also going to show you how to apply this to a group policy. Now let me explain that if you understand how the group policy and permissions work and how the permissions behind folders work, you are 90% of the way done with understanding most of Active Directory. So let's start with the first thing. Let's create a share. We'll do it the old-fashioned way, so you can kind of see how this works. So we're going to create a new folder, call it new share. We're going to right click, properties, sharing. Sorry if I'm going too fast. Advanced sharing, and we're going to share out the folder. So what this means is that when you navigate to this server, you're going to be able to see a shared folder. Now, right now, everybody can see it. What we're going to do is remove that. We're going to add something like domain admins, so the domain admin always has full permissions to that folder. And then we're going to also add our new group. What do I call it? Test? Yes. So we're going to add the test group and we're going to allow read-write permissions, which is the change and read. Okay, so again, right-click properties, go to the sharing, go to advanced sharing. Now in this new folder, the share name, usually you want to leave it as default because it's going to be the folder name. You can of course change that if you want to. Then we're going to head over to permissions and we're going to add a group that we just created. Keep in mind, you can also add specific users, but what happens is if you have 50 users, it's much easier to go about adding the permissions to a single group, adding all of those 50 members to one group, and then applying the group to the folder. Otherwise, you're gonna have to set permissions for every single user that you add, and that would be absolutely miserable. So that is the whole purpose of creating groups for folders. All right, so let's cancel this, go back here, and here's our test group. Hit apply, hit OK. Hit apply, hit OK. So what we are going to see here is if you head over to our file and storage services and head over to shares, we are now going to see our new share. Keep in mind, all of these were technically defaults when you add features to the server. This is the only one that I actually created. So let's go back over to this and create a new text file just so we can see how everything works. And I'm going to open up my computer that is already joined to the domain. Again, I created a video on that if you needed to see it. Now I'm going to kick myself out of here because I'm on a different computer. All right, so here we are, we signed in. Now what we're going to do is check on that shared folder so we can understand what it's actually doing. Voila, so when I navigate to the server using this whack DC, this is the computer name, and we're just navigating to it through File Explorer. And what this does is let us see what is part of that server. We can also do the same thing for printers, which I'll show right after this. So here's our folder. We can now navigate it. We can check out the document that's in it. We can change the name. We can save. Kidding, we don't have permissions to the actual file, which would be in here. Notice that there's no write permissions for users. I did not change that, so I'm just going to ignore that portion. But anyway, as you can see, this is the whole purpose of adding a share and something like mapping it to a network drive, hit finish, blah, blah, blah. Now you can see down here so now you can see down here, if we expand PC and move this over, we now have a network share. Yay. So this is now attached to the domain controller. And if you have permissions to this file share, you can now see it. Now, as another example, if we sign into a user account that is not part of that test group, we won't actually be able to get to this location. When you type in this DC, if you're not part of that group, you're not even going to see this folder here because you don't have permissions to see it. And that is the purpose of this group. So let's do the same thing, but let's do it with a printer, right? So on our domain controller again, we're going to print management. And we're going to add my home printer. I'm not going to go over this whole configuration. That could be for another video, but I'll let you follow along here. So here is my printer. We don't want to use the one with the port. We're just going to use the normal IP address. Hit next, blah, 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 kind of ignore everything. We're going to just use this generic text only. Normally you would do and install a new driver, find the HP driver for the specific printer, and then apply that. So when a computer connects to the printer, it downloads the most recent driver. But we are going to just use this generic thing for testing. Same thing with the file, or rather the folder. We had this little share this folder button. Now we have a share this printer button. Exact same idea here. So we're just going to share out the printer. Now, if we refresh this, we now have a printer hosted on a server that we can see from all of our devices on the domain. The only thing we need to do is navigate to whatever the server is that hosts it. And then easy enough, all we do is double click it and it installs the driver that's associated to it on our device. And now we have a printer installed on our computer that is part of a server. But you might be asking, okay, we went off on this weird little tangent. What does this have to do with Active Directory? Well, we're going to go back to our group. Now remember that my user is part of this group. And let's assume, again, we have 50 users part of this group. Or maybe every single user in one office wants the exact same printer. What we're going to do, here I'll close this so I can show you guys how to open it. Head over to Tools, and we're going to do a single easy group policy. Group policy, as you can see, is broken down by OU. So we created this Office OU. So anything up in this root will apply to all of these folders. If you apply something to Office, it'll only apply to anything under the Office OU. If you apply something to the users group, it'll only apply to anything in this computer's organizational unit and nothing on the outside. Right now, all we're going to do is create a group policy on the outside. We're going to name this printers. So let's head over to our printer policy. We can right click, edit. Again, I'm not going to go over the whole configuration of group policies and explain it too thoroughly, but I do want to explain how Active Directory interacts with group policy because this is kind of the whole point. So now hit new and we can add a printer here. We're going to put in our IP address of the printer. You can find that by going into your print management settings, go to printers. It's this one here, go to properties, ports, expand this. I know there's a little click. Again, it's just kind of showing or demonstrating how this functions. So it's the .76. Let's go back to our policy. So we're going to do 192.168.1.76. So this is our printer. We can add in our local path, which will be DC. Hit another backslash, and let's go get that printer name, which will be this. So let's go get our printer name. This menu here. So this isn't the printer name that we want. We actually want the share name. So if you go to the properties, hit sharing, we want to copy this name here because this is what everybody's going to see. Now, for example, this is the actual name we want. So let's go back into our policy. I don't know where my window went. Go and paste that name in. Let's hit apply, hit OK. So now we have our lovely printer in our group policy. So again, the point of this is we have this policy currently applied to everything. If we want to apply this to just our computers in a specific office, that way each office gets its own set of printers, all we have to do, right click, link an existing GPO, here's my printers, hit OK. Now this is applying directly to the computers and we can delete this one. Now keep in mind, this is still here. That is because we didn't actually delete the group policy. We just kind of removed it from where it was placed. Our group policies are actually created and stored in this group policy object section, which will be down here. That way we can kind of delete and it's still here. We can just add it at any time. You just link an existing, voila. Now we can kind of delete, add back, delete, add back. Things like that. So that's it. That's how we kind of manage our group policies. So as a little review, we created a user account and went over all of the user account information with you and how to configure it. Then we created a security group, added the user to that security group, and then made the security group function in a way where we can now create separate permissions on folders, and we can create separate permissions on printers and apply them in a group policy as well. And this group policy will be tied to whatever organizational unit you decide. So what happens if I end up rebooting this computer? Because of the group policy, it's going to pick up this printer automatically because we entered it into group policy, and it's going to map it to this computer automatically. Of course, I'm not going to demonstrate that whole process because then we have to remove the printer and then we're going to have to restart the computer just for you to see the printers back on there. But that's all it's going to do. So I really hope this video has helped you guys understand Active Directory and all the little components that go with it. If you have any questions or again, like the video, please like and subscribe and it'll do me a huge favor. And I hope to see you guys in my next video. So thanks a lot.